radio and podcasts. That's what's coming up on The Art of Bombing, episode 162.
My friend Dan, he's got a podcast, 'cause all comics need a podcast, and nobody had a podcast called The Art of Bombing. So Dan went out and bought a tape deck. Who knows why he bought a tape deck? Podcasts don't get played on tape decks, but Dan is from the 80s. So hey there, all you funny jerks, come talk to Dan about your work. Tell him all about your worst times. It's The Art of Bombing.
Welcome to a brand new episode of The Art of Bombing. I'm Dan Bublitz Jr. here with you on Tuesday, October 6th, 2020. It is officially the Halloween season. It is fall. I hope everybody had a great week since the last time I was in your earbuds coming through the sonar, radar, satellite dishes, wherever, the waves, the airwaves, radio airwaves. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. And radio airwaves, speaking of radio airwaves, my guest today is a former radio personality in the Sioux Falls area, Dave Hawley. And now he's a podcast personality with his podcast, The Dave Hawley Hour. We had a great conversation, and we talked about podcasting and radio. When I was in Sioux Falls the last time, he's been always been a big supporter of the arts. I recorded an episode of his podcast, my second appearance, not to brag, on the Dave Hawley Hour. And then right after, he was a guest on mine. Now, he has a background in radio, and he has a background in improv and theater, and he's very big into the arts and entertainment, and that's what the Dave Hawley Hour is. It is a podcast about the Sioux Falls area arts and entertainment. It is a great podcast. So if you're in that area, you should check it out if you want to know what's what on arts and entertainment in the Sioux Falls area. But he was a great guest on my podcast, so that's what's coming up today on the podcast. Before we get to that, not a lot to promote, actually. Next Monday, October 12th, Renewed returns with a new cast of comedians that will be workshopping their jokes. It is an interactive live stream, so if you'd like to check that out, it airs at 7 p.m. on the Art of Bombing Facebook page and in the Art of Bombing Facebook group. That is a public group if you would like to join it. I also sent out the first Art of Bombing monthly email with basically a recap of the month. If you want to get involved if you want to be, get that email, get on that email list, go to the artofbombingpod.com to sign up. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the podcast. And if you haven't done so yet and you feel so inclined to do so, I would appreciate a 5-star rating of the podcast and perhaps a nice review where you say some nice words. The more ratings and reviews we have, the better off we are on the Art of Bombing. More people will hear this podcast, and that's what I would like. More people. I would like some more listeners for the podcast. So share the content. If when you see it on the Facebooks and the social medias, hit that share and like and comment and engage with the content that we are creating here at the Art of Bombing. Right. I think that's all I have to promote this week, so we're going to get into this conversation. I will say we don't have a typical stand-up soundbite this week because he did his first stand-up set while I was in Sioux Falls, and he did great. We talk about that a little bit, but I do have a little sample of his radio voice that we'll be playing. So it might not it's not going to be funny because it's not stand-up, but it's still a soundbite. So here's my conversation with Dave Hawley of the Dave Hawley Hour. Enjoy.
It's now time for the stand-up soundbite.
Hi, I'm Dave Hawley. Thanks for stopping by the Dave Hawley Hour website. I have a passion for arts and entertainment, especially in and around Sioux Falls, or as those of us that live here like to call the area, the Sioux Empire. The tagline I use for the show is Sioux Empire Arts and Entertainment Conversation. I lean heavily on that word, conversations. Despite more than a quarter century in broadcasting, a fair amount of those in news talk, I don't consider myself a hard-hitting, tough interviewer. But what I do love, is having a great conversation with someone that's incredibly passionate about their art and or entertainment. While my name is part of the title of the show, I might not end up talking that much, because I love hearing what gets them jazzed.
We're live-ish down by the Wood Grain Brewery in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. One of your favorite places to...
That it is.
Not just one of your favorite places, but also to record your podcast.
That's right.
Yeah, which we just got done doing, the Dave Hawley
so this
Hour.
is the turnaround is fair play trick.
That's right. That's right. That's what this is. We could have, if we really wanted to, if our podcasts were similar. We're not similar we're similar because they're podcasts, but you have a different format than I do because you typically do individual interviews with people and then mash them into one episode.
Right.
So you'll have like two different guests.
Exactly.
Excuse me. You have more of a... Yours is more set up like a radio type segment.
Yeah,
kind of
and
like,
obviously that's because of background.
Yeah. And if you couldn't tell, ladies and gentlemen, by that beautiful voice, you as soon as you hear it, you're like, yeah, he definitely has to do radio.
That was the case, except, the two companies, for those that, aren't from the Sioux Falls area, because you're up in the Twin Cities, and, this goes worldwide. The Sioux Falls radio scene, there are 16 licensed frequencies. They used to have 16 separate, stations, 16 different actual radio stations with their call letters and so forth. Well, then people started to realize AM is folding, and so they would take the AM signal off of like the news talk station, and if they had a little lower power, not so much listen to FM, they would put that, simulcast that over to the FM so that, people that really were digging the news talk and so forth and didn't want to listen to crackling in the AM signal could go over and listen on FM. Deregulation came along long before that. And so you end up with, instead of mom and pop stations, it's conglomerations, which are now owned by even bigger conglomerations, because those 16 stations are in two different buildings, 8 in one and 8 in another.
Wow.
And I have been let go by both buildings.
Well, you did seems like you're doing what every good radio personality will do when they get let go by all the stations, is podcast.
Start a podcast. What the hell, huh?
It worked for Mark Maron.
Yeah, he's done okay.
Yeah, he's been doing all right with his podcast.
Mine's a little more niche marketed, and my average only has 3 digits in it for the number of people that listen on a weekly basis.
That's still better than some.
That's true.
That's what you got to do. I mean, because your podcast is more based on the local
very much so,
arts and entertainment.
Arts and entertainment in the Sioux Falls area.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a lot. It's a lot like this podcast. The Art of Bombing is it's got a very tight niche audience. It's not anybody's going to want to listen to this, but people who are super fans of comedy or comedians that are typically 0 to 5 years into stand-up, that's who's going to listen to, and that's a small audience.
Right, and with small audiences means we don't get those big podcasting bucks that,
no.
Oh, I'm going to become a podcaster because don't have to work, and I can make $250,000 in my first year. Good luck to you on that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I probably thought that when I started this. I'm like, I'm going to do this cool podcast that nobody's ever done and talk about things that are different in comedy, get a bunch of fans. And then I was like, you're a dummy. This is a very tight niche audience you got a very tight niche demographic.
Yeah, because at first, because a lot of them look like it's going to be at least some money coming in, because we'll get you X amount of national advertisers, and it's all spread out, but at least you'll maybe make a little. And then you start reading a little further. Yeah, 1,000 downloads. They got to have 1,000 downloads. Oh, in one show.
Yeah,
one episode has to have 1,000 downloads.
Well, and then in some of the, because there are some of the like podcasting hosting sites have monetization like incorporated.
The
but,
Patreon thing and so
well, no,
forth,
not
or?
Patreon, but like I use Liberated Syndication. I think it's called Libsyn is kind of the hype of it,
yes.
to host the podcast. And they have it so you can monetize your show, but you have to, before you can even think about that, you have to have 20,000 downloads. But I think that's lifetime downloads. But still,
yeah.
20,000 is, I think I just crossed 20,000. I'm up to like 20,100 or maybe
Excellent.
Maybe 21,000.
Yeah.
But that's 3 years.
Yeah.
Too. Like it sounds like it's like, oh man, that's awesome. 20,000. It's like, yeah, but I've been doing this for almost 4 years.
Yeah.
So it's not a big average.
Yeah, it's a passion thing. If you become a podcaster, you better have a passion for what you're going to do your podcast on and be consistent too.
Absolutely. You definitely. And that's one of the key to succeeding with podcasting is consistency. That was one thing, because it was a learning. I don't know how it was for you, but it was a very big learning curve for me in the sense that I couldn't just, if I wanted to really build an audience and like get people that were excited and interested in the podcast, you have to be consistent. You can't just post sporadically, and that's what I was doing. When I started, I didn't have like I'm going to do this weekly, or I'm going to do this every other week, or once a month. I was just like, I'm out on the road. I'm going to interview this comic. We're going to have a great conversation, and then when I can, I'm going to put it up. So and get it up, and then it might be a month, and I didn't do nothing, and then I'll get this, and then I was like, talking to some other people, and one of the biggest things to succeed is that consistency, and that's. If you're going to do it once a week, then you need to do it once a week. Yeah. And whatever day you say you're going to release it, that needs to be the day.
A new episode every Thursday for the Dave Holly Hour.
Exactly.
But the other thing about it was, I had some experience on some technical things, but not as much as I really needed to know when I started the podcast. I did wait because originally it was going to be on 4/4, as in April 4th of 2019 was when I was going to start, because that would have been the anniversary of my father's passing.
Okay.
My father was a great person that, in terms of caring for people, you knew two things. You knew you were loved and that he was proud of you, even if you didn't give him a reason to be. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, he'd find this pretty cool. But then that year was the year in Sioux Falls where I took a $2,500 vehicle that I had and throughout the year made it a $10,000 vehicle with repairs because of potholes and having to have tow jobs and so forth. And so that just got rough. So it had come and gone, but I didn't stop preparing for the show. So I started looking at how am I going to market this? What am I going to do? What do I really want to focus in on and so forth? And then the next thing was it was going to be, because I knew I wanted it to come out on a Thursday. A friend of mine, when I used to work with him in radio, we would always go for coffee on Thursday morning before we started our work, and we'd toast to Weekend Eve. Mm-hmm. And so I knew that's when I wanted it to come out because, Thursday in Sioux Falls, at least, is kind of the day that the arts and entertainment really kicks into high gear.
Oh, yeah, especially for the weekend.
Especially for the weekend, then. And you're usually looking at things on Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday afternoon that you can take in for arts and entertainment. And so I wanted to do that. Well, the next one that came along that had a cool date was 9/9. And I was like, oh, yeah, there we go. Well, that wasn't going to happen because summer took place and we had a new grandchild, and so we were having fun that way. And then also the fact that on the 7th of September, I did something I hadn't done in 20 years, and I DJ'd a wedding dance for a friend. And, when you DJ at the age of, mid to upper 50s, it takes a day or two for the body to come back. So I knew I wasn't going to be, prepared and be able to put in the time for it. So then the next thing I did is 10/10. It's a Thursday. Oh, that's cool. And so I got out the biggest sticky pad I could find, and in the largest felt tip pen, 10/10/19, and I put it up on my computer monitor. and started to force myself and started to get everything ready. And then the next thing was, okay, it's a couple weeks beforehand, but I'm posting it on social media. So out comes the Facebook with it saying begins 10/10/19. So I held myself accountable. And then first episode, I did say, the goal is to be every week. With everything that's happened in my life over the past few years, I had had a divorce. I had lost a toe to diabetes. I had had a hip surgery. I had had a knee surgery. And so I knew that things came up in life that might keep you from being able to pull through. But so I said that, and then the next Thursday, sure enough, I had a second episode. And I had a really well, first of all, when you do this, you have no idea what to expect when you start. And so the first episode came out on Thursday morning. By the end of the day, I had 25 downloads. I'm going, hey, that's all right. And then, throughout the week, it got over 50, hitting towards 75 and so forth. Well, then the next episode number 2, I only had one guest, but it was a pretty good guest for the arts and entertainment scene in Sioux Falls. His name is Bob Wendland, multi-talented singer, actor, and so forth. And he shared it on Facebook, and then also he hashtagged every single person he had mentioned during the interview.
Oh, wow.
And the first day I had 75 people that had downloaded it. And I go, oh, wow, this is great. And then I go, hey, look at episode number 1. It's hitting more people now. And that's the thing that, you forget about is somebody may come along. I'm going to be this one that we recorded with you is going to be episode number 49. Mm-hmm. And I will still, during the week, get hits on, like, episode number 3.
Yep.
Things like that. So it's a really different thing to come out with. But you're right. Consistency is just such a big part of it. And delivering not so much just on the consistency, but on the content.
Mm-hmm.
It did take me,
important.
I knew what I wanted to do, but at first I was going to have all these kitschy little things besides the interviews. There was going to be, like a Dave's Fave, one of my favorite restaurants.
Very radio.
Yeah.
Ish,
it
right?
was very radio-like. And then I realized about third week in, drop the other stuff. I still do the honorable mention on something that just made me kind of giggle or whatever throughout the week, and just stick to the interviews. And then it wasn't long after that I got a great testimonial from a chiropractor in town, and he says, you know what? He says, listening to your show, he says, it's like eavesdropping on a conversation with 2 really interesting people.
Oh, that's a great compliment.
Oh, man, that's gold right there.
Is that on the website?
Yeah, it is. It is on the website, DaveHollyHour.com.
Nice plug. See, you got that marketing thing down. You were talking about trying to, coming up with your plan and figuring out marketing and that thing. And I was on your podcast. Now I've been a 2-time Dave Holly Hour guest. And the first time I came down to do it, I was like, holy buckets. I've been doing this longer, and I need to step up my game. Because he was like, he has, he had the microphones with the media holders and had his stickers and logos and all kinds of stuff, his colors and everything going on, which is key because you do a lot of your recording in public places too.
Yes,
That's
I do.
another thing.
Yeah.
You try to support a lot of the local, breweries and coffee shops and go and do the recordings at these places.
I still need to find a place that serves whiskey, though.
Oh, well,
I did have one time out at Barrel House, is the place.
Yeah.
It cost me a lot of money to do that podcast that day.
Yeah, that's the one thing that can definitely get expensive about not just all the things that go with the podcast, but when you do it in a public place, it's easy to go grab a beer or grab a drink or whatever.
It's called filling out your Schedule C along with your 1040 and taking every deduction you can.
And absolutely.
Legally.
Yeah, but you have, like I said, really good marketing, and I feel like is that something that you your marketing skills are something you gained through doing radio for as long as you did?
Marketing skills just kind of came along afterward, but it was a reflection of all that. For instance, I have my own mouse pads printed, and I use those underneath my microphone stands, and that actually came from when I was in radio at KELO AM. You would go out and do a remote, and the engineers used them because they didn't want any feedback and people slapping on the microphone and things like that. But it was also, secondary. It's also, a little top of mind awareness. People think that. And, now I've gone to the point where when I am recording out in public, I have a little sign that says I'm recording.
I saw that when I walked in today.
New episode comes out Thursday, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and so forth. So just all those little things. And,
absolutely.
And I get to the point where I purposely drop business cards. Places. We go out and eat a lot because we like to support local places. Waitresses always need pens. At first, I wasn't going to buy pens. But
usually, it's the other way around.
Right.
People are stealing their pens, not showing up and giving them pens.
So I was like, here, have a few of these. And if you lose them, I'll bring you more.
That's a good plan.
But I've had to learn some of the marketing along the way, because back in the days when I was in radio, when I lost my last radio job, I think I had just signed on to Facebook that fall and didn't think of it in terms of a marketing tool at all.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's just, checking in with old classmates and family and friends and, having fun with it. And now, because, I record usually on Mondays, Sundays and Mondays with my guests. And then on Wednesday, after I get off work at 4 o'clock from my regular job, then I put it all together, and it comes out Thursday morning. And then I actually can set it so it comes out at 12:01 a.m. Central Time. But as soon as I wake up on Thursday morning, out comes the tablet, and I've usually already got my promo picture that I want put together. And that's when I post it on all my social media. And, between everything, I've got it down to like 15 minutes because I've got one place that'll post it to 2 others and things like that.
That comes at hand.
So you learn that part of it, because at first it was about an hour's worth every Thursday morning. And I'm sure with the subject matter of the art of bombing, that you at times go, is this really all worth it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I think about this a lot with this podcast because, there's a lot of passion that I have with my podcast. Obviously, that's why I do it. But at the same time, I'm like, man, I spend a lot of money on this.
Right.
I spend money on, for the web hosting. I have a website. Yeah. That's $15 to $20 a month. Then I have the hosting of the actual the podcast hosting.
Exactly.
That's another, $15 a month. And like all these little things add up quickly. And if you're not making money on it, it's just a hobby at that point.
Right.
And then it's like, you look at your numbers of what people are, they don't look like people are really, you don't have, because it's also hard to get reviews. And one thing I've realized, with my podcast anyway, is that a lot of people listen to podcasts in different platforms. Like everybody's promoting, they'll promote Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever. Well, Spotify doesn't even let people do reviews of podcasts. So they can't give you the review. A lot of people don't use Apple Podcasts to listen to. They use an app on their phone, and even in that app, you can't necessarily do the reviews and ratings and things like that. So it's hard to get ratings and reviews, which will ultimately help your podcast. But in order for them to do it, it is a chore. And so it's like, now I realize why people aren't doing this. Well, you can ask and ask and ask, and it's like, I don't blame them. It's kind of a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
It really is.
A couple of things to piggyback on that. First of all, to get a true number of how many people you have listening is difficult.
It absolutely is.
Because you're going to get a download number, okay? But then you've also got several different places it's getting downloaded. How many people are listening along with that person if they downloaded it? How many people are distributing? How many people are going back and listening to other things after that? And so it's really difficult to just say, yep, 1,216 people, you know.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, and back on that, too, you know, not knowing how many people are actually listening to an episode, you know. Like with mine, I'm pretty sure it's individual. I don't think people are getting together and playing it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, so it's pretty good estimation on that.
I have an older demographic, Dan.
That's fair. But yours
They
is
still hunker down around the radio.
That's good because you're playing right into that market because you've got more of a radio show than a podcast. So it works out. You're doing both. You got the podcast for the young whippersnappers.
That's right.
You know.
But the other thing, when you were talking about, you know, the expenses that go along with it, you know, basically every episode, it's like, you know, I've got a few, you know, that don't have to pay much to be on because I can't produce a big sheet that says, here's how many people, and so forth. So it's kind of a gut feeling. And the big thing is I just basically want to make sure that all those things during the month are paid for.
Yep. Yeah,
so I'm doing it for free with the exception of the fact that, like the Sky Lounge, before I started the podcast, I was already hosting trivia there about every 3 weeks and so forth. Mm-hmm. Then after the podcast started, they became a sponsor. And also upped how many times I host trivia then.
Oh.
So it went from once every 3 weeks to at least twice a month, sometimes 3 times a month. And, you know, there was one time where it was like 5 weeks in a row I hosted. So that helped pay for a lot.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Well, and that's one thing, too, that's nice about what you're doing, you know, versus, excuse me, I get this little... My throat just has been so irritated all weekend because I'm not used to using it, and now it's tired.
Yeah, after a few shows in a row.
After a few shows in a row, a lot of talking. It's like, you need to stop talking. We're done. But that really helps, too, like with your podcast, because you're more local.
Right.
You focus on local arts and entertainment, so a lot of your audience... You know, it's going to be local, so it's a lot easier to approach a potential local sponsor.
True.
Excuse me. Because a lot of times, podcasts don't get local sponsors. You know what I mean? Like,
True.
They're looking for national sponsors
Yeah.
is typically what they end up getting. But having that's a real good bonus. You know, it really does help because you can say, hey, this is a local podcast. The local people are going to...
Yeah, it's the other things that come along for me then because of the podcast.
Yep.
That put a little change in my pocket to go jingle, jingle, jang.
It definitely helps. Because that's the other thing, like when you're trying to approach people, you know, you got your numbers, but the one thing I've always found frustrating with podcasts, there's no solid way to tell how many people are subscribing.
True.
I mean, it's one thing, you can get numbers and see how many people have downloaded your podcast, and you just assume that's how many people listen to that episode, but you have no idea how many people are actually subscribed to it. You know, like you could have 100 people subscribe, but only get 25 listens or downloads or whatever. You know, so
and then
it's very
you
hard.
also wonder how many people are out there going, hey, you know what? Do me a favor, just download my podcast. You don't have to listen to it, but just download it so I can make some money.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure there's some of that. They're just like, just subscribe and don't even listen to it. It's a terrible podcast.
I need numbers.
Yeah, right. Now, because this is the art of bombing,
right?
And we got to get into some of that too. We can talk about our podcasting all day, and it's good. You know, it's a good conversation and for people to learn from if they want to get into podcasting and all the stuff that goes into it. But you got a long history of arts and entertainment, not just being in radio, but improv.
Right, improv,
I assume
comedy.
You've done some theater.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah,
So, okay.
yeah,
That's
done
what I
all
thought.
that,
Yeah.
yeah.
You pretty much done a lot of the performance side of things, especially. And now, just the other night, you did your first stand up.
Yeah. Gave it a go at an open mic.
You gave it a go. I got to witness it. You did real well.
I'm glad you can say that because we didn't get any pictures.
Oh, yeah. There's no proof I did it. Yeah, that's right. You can just say that you did it, but there's no proof. That's funny. Yeah.
As mentioned on the Art of Bombing podcast
There's
with
proof.
Dan Bublitz.
There's proof. He witnessed it. He said so. He was there. Yeah. But you can definitely tell, though, like you went up I assume you went up on a whim. You just decided, I've wanted to do this. This is on my bucket list. I'm going to do it. Or did you go to the open mic already knowing you were going to sign up?
No, I did not.
All right, that's what I thought.
Our mutual friend, Zach Dresch, was saying, before it started, there's still time to sign up. And he looks at me, Dave. So, there was a little bit in there. But then, and I hate to admit this, but it was first comedian didn't do so well. And so I'm just sitting there going, if Zach walks by again, I'll say, hey, let's do it. And then he kept walking on the other side of the table. And then,
you're like, well, that's a sign. The universe definitely does not want me to do
tonight.
it.
And then all of a sudden he was sitting behind me. I just couldn't take the itch anymore. And I turned around and said, all right, you got room for one more? And then he goes, oh, yeah. So then before me is, you had already done your set. So that's a tough act to follow. And then Skylar Bulks, who is a very good comedian from the Sioux Falls area, is right before me. And I'm like, oh, crap, what did I just sign up for?
Well, like I said, you got to be able to follow everybody.
Yeah.
You got to be able to follow everybody.
Yep, and so that's what I had to do. And thankfully, the type of comedy I did was considerably different than anybody else. So, that gives you a little leeway. That it's not just, we've kind of heard this same song, same dance.
Yeah. Well, and I think another thing that helps with you, because you already have the improv experience and you have the big radio voice, which is it's interesting to listen to. Like, you go up there and you start talking with the big radio voice, and people are going to automatically be interested in what you have to say, too. Oh, you can buy the radio voice?
Yeah, it's a Walmart. Top shelf, $29.95.
I'll have to go check that out right after this. Or maybe we should stop this recording so I can go and be. And now we're back to the Art of Bombing with Dave Hawley.
But see, there's something you have that I don't. You have one of the world's greatest giggles.
No.
In fact, the last time, not this time that we just recorded prior to this recording, the last time you were on, I saved a little bit of your giggle.
Oh.
And it's in my sound effects file now.
Oh, that's great.
It's not called giggle, it's just called booblets. Although giggle would be shorter.
That's funny. I've made it into a sound effects file.
Yeah.
That is amazing. I'll take it. That's a compliment.
There's your next intro when you go on stage.
Yeah, right.
And he recently made it into a sound effects file.
That's right. Voiceover work now. I'm going to have to. You shouldn't have told me that. I'm going to have to send you a bill. As soon as we're done here.
Professional services, talent.
Yep. As soon as we're done here, I'm going to make an invoice. Oh, man, that's funny. But you could tell, versus, because I've been to a lot of open mics, and I've seen people who just decided on a whim to go up. No plan, no nothing, because they didn't plan on going up. They just were there, and they're like, oh, this looks easy. I can do this. And they go up, and it's not as easy as they think.
Right.
And they do horrible, and to be expected. I've definitely seen the opposite where somebody went up and did fine.
Right.
Because they, obviously they're charismatic. And that was the situation with you. You went up and you did really good. But
Thank you.
You have all these skills. So it's not like, even though it was your first time officially doing stand-up comedy, it really wasn't like your first time doing stand-up comedy. You know what I mean? You could definitely tell you're pretty seasoned in that. So, but how did it feel to you to do stand-up versus something like improv? Because with improv, with stand-up, you're on your own. It's you. You are it. If it don't go well, you are to blame. Improv, you're up there with a whole team, and it is a team. You can't. Nobody. If somebody's just trying to be the star of the team,
it's not going to work.
It's going to be terrible improv.
In fact, one of the rules of improv is that you make everybody else good.
Yeah,
that's the whole premise of yes and.
Oh, absolutely.
You don't deny anybody and so forth.
Absolutely. And but on the other side of the coin, though, if somebody is terrible at improv,
then you got to rescue them.
And you got to rescue them, and then the whole team looks bad because you struggle. So it's like if one person tries to, so you have to have a good medium there, with all your players to be a good improv team.
True.
But so how did that feel? Being by yourself, not having a team to rely on.
It felt great.
That's good.
I was happy with how it went. It was interesting to kind of get an idea of, okay, that hit better than you ever thought it would. And then something else that you thought was just going to be a knockout laugh silence. So it's a different thing for sure. But then I already had some of that with improv, though. Because there's times that you think you've just hit the funniest on-the-spot line and nothing.
Well, that's okay. That's a good lead-in then. Is there a time where you, like, performing improv, or any performance, really, where you felt like you bombed, like a show that you can kind of look back on and be like, yeah, that was terrible?
Oh, yeah. And, the thing about improv is at least you've got a chance for redemption because you're probably in another 5 minutes doing a completely different scene. And so you have to have a very short memory for that. Where improv gets tricky is when you do have a team that has some great chemistry, and then all of a sudden a little cog gets thrown in it, and you're not reading the other person's mind, and it kind of takes away from what improv was supposed to be. And so then you do fail as a team. And that's tough. And the other part with improv is just if there's not something that ends that scene on its own and somebody just finally calls the scene from off stage, people can understand. They go, that wasn't quite
that was not working.
Are we sure we're coming back next month to see these people again?
Yep.
So that, and we've anybody that's ever been in improv has been the person that either A, hasn't been able to end the scene, or B, has been the one off on the stage and said, scene.
Yeah, I've only taken some improv classes, and I've been in that.
It's almost like the old days of World Wrestling, back when they did it out of the studios in the Twin Cities.
Yep.
And time limit on this match is 15 minutes.
Yep. Got to put that limit down.
Time limit on this game of improv.
Was there like a specific show, though, that you can remember where the gig just was bad because just things weren't going right?
The first show I was ever in as part of a troupe, we did it up at Del Rapids, and it was their big Quarry Days, their big, annual summer festival. And it was a Sunday night show in a park. We had no microphones, and lots of kids there. And so everything that we had been practicing, I wouldn't say it was necessarily blue, but it could go blue.
Oh, okay. So it was more targeted towards adults.
We were targeted toward an adult audience, and here's, basically teenagers and younger up at the front. The adults are out back drinking beer, which would have been our ideal crowd. And, that first time when we finished, we said, well, at least we got one under the belt. That's really what we all came away with. But otherwise, in terms of a performance, no, didn't even come close to anything that we had ever done while working on it. And by working on it, I don't mean that we're rehearsing.
No,
you practice improv. You don't rehearse it.
Yeah, you don't rehearse. You practice. Yeah, I mean they'll call it rehearsing. A lot of people. Yeah, we got improv rehearsal, which just means you're practicing.
Yeah. But there's so many people when they hear that. Oh, you're an improv, huh? Yeah, I got to go to practice now. You what?
Oh, yeah. It's not on the spot? Well, I mean, it is.
Yes, it is.
Practice is going to be on the spot, too. That's how improv works. That's how you practice it. You do it. Difference is there's just not an audience.
Right. No,
so it's even more awkward. Because now we're just being a bunch of silly gooses,
right?
For a couple of people.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Because when it's hitting and clicking, it's marvelous. It's a magical thing. But when it's a bomb, Hiroshima.
Yeah. Did you ever, when you were in radio, did you ever have something
I
where?
Was hoping we'd get to this part, Dan.
I'm definitely being in radio as long as you have. There's got to be some good stories.
Well, yeah.
Especially
first of all,
because you got to really watch language, and any bit of a slip up can really derail something.
All right. So the first thing before I was ever employed by a radio station, I would help out the hometown broadcaster when he would do football games. Okay, when he would do the play-by-play. And I was a freshman in college in a didn't go to college too far away from my hometown, so I would go back to all the games and help him out. And the situation was we were doing it because the station we did it for was based out of Laverne, and we were in Rock Rapids. Now, the AM station was one of those old daytimers that, it would have to go off at sunset unless you had a particular program that could go up till X amount of time. But as soon as that was done, you were done. So our games were never live. They were always being recorded back on something that, here you go, history lesson, kids, these big old reel-to-reel machines with tape. No digital, tape. All right? And so that meant that reel kept going the whole time, even during commercial breaks. And so then what would take place is after the Laverne football game was over, then the Central Lyon football game would be played. And that meant that there had to be somebody in the actual studio hitting stop when we'd say, and we'll be back after this. And they'd hit stop. They'd play a commercial. During that time the commercial's playing, they would go next to where they would hear, and we're back in 3, 2, 1. And they'd put it there, pause it. So when the commercials was over, back to the game. Well, the people that would run those games would sometimes go out, smoke a cigarette, or maybe they'd go over to the production studio and record their commercials that they needed to have ready for the next day. So on rare occasion, those commercial breaks being chatted about would be played back. And, the game that this happened on happened to be homecoming, so it wasn't just the varsity cheerleaders. It was the junior varsity cheerleaders and the varsity cheerleaders all smack dab in our line of sight. Now, mind you, I'm 18 at this point, going on 19. And so the hormones were still kicking in pretty good, and I loved cheerleaders. And the gentleman I'm doing the game with, though, is a respected businessman in town.
Oh.
And he did the sports part, the play-by-play, as a side gig. Mm-hmm. And so during this, it's like, ooh, oh my, look at that. Never named anybody, never specifically said anything about particular body parts, but it was plenty of oohing and aahing. All right, so that got played back because whoever was running the board that night during the game missed it. All right, so that's one.
Oh, man, that's funny.
The best one, however, was that same little AM radio station had a big FM station that I was the morning person on the FM. But occasionally on a Saturday, if the AM guy had the Saturday off, I would have to go fill in his spot. Well, the FM station signed on at 5 a.m. The AM signed on at 6. Well, whoever was working on the FM station was the one that was responsible for going and turning on the transmitter for the AM and so forth. And so I am working the Saturday morning AM shift, and back then, games were broadcast over a telephone to go back into the studio and then turned up on the board. And like I said, at one point, that was an old daytimer, so it had to shut down. But whoever had worked the game the night before had left the telephone on. So at about 10 minutes till 6, the guy that had done the game the night before calls up, and I answer the phone. And at this point, the transmitter hasn't been turned on to broadcast yet. So I'm sitting there talking to him, and just at that time, chunk, the gentleman that was working the FM turned on the AM signal. And he said, so I want to give you a score from last night. And I said, okay, let me find a effing pencil. And he goes, you realize the phone's turned on, so turn it off quickly. We haven't hit the sign-on cart yet. That's still a few minutes away, but there was an actual transmitted signal. Well, you got to remember, a lot of elderly people had alarm clocks that were set to that radio station. And I'm sitting there going, oh, dear God, I'm fired, thinking to myself.
Yeah.
But never heard anything until 8:20. That's when we had Classic Coke Trivia with Larry Goebel down at Kenny's Superfoods. And so I do the intro. It's time for Classic Coke Trivia with Larry Goebel from Kenny Superfoods. How are you today, Larry? Says, great, Dave. Did you find your pencil?
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah,
wow.
That was a dandy.
Oh, I'll bet. Oh, man.
But, radio is a lot like improv in the fact that every time that you've turned off the microphone, you get a chance to redeem yourself the next time around.
Yeah,
too.
Absolutely. Well, unless you do too many slips of the swears, and then you're gonna just be done. Yeah, there's no redemption. You're done.
and then I did make an ethnic remark one time, and I apologized for it right away, and even joked a little bit because there's some talk that maybe I do have some Jewish blood, or not necessarily blood, but ethnicity back on my mother's side, and I used the phrase, when somebody was talking about bargaining something.
Oh, yeah.
And that they blanked them down, and I said, I cannot believe how insensitive that was, and I apologized right away.
Yeah.
And a lady that happened to be of that ethnicity did call in to the general manager, and she says, now, I just wanted to let you know he said it because he apologized for it right away, and I could tell he's very sincere, but I just thought it was worth bringing up.
Oh, yeah.
And so then the general manager told my program director, and then 2 days later, the program director calls me into his office and says, you know what this is about? Oh, no.
That's a bad...
He says, yeah, he says, and don't worry. He says, I heard it, went back and listened to it. But, it was filed as a complaint, so I just needed to sign here and send it off to the FCC. So, the Federal Communications Commission knows about me one way or another.
That's right. Oh, wow. That's one of... It's amazing, though. You think about technology and how things have changed from radio to podcasting to reel to reels to digital uploads and all this, and how it's changed. And to think you said a thing on a radio, and before you finally got disciplined for it, radio was so slow it took like multiple days because it had to go through all the channels. It started from the complaint, then it went to the station manager, or the program director, then finally back to you. And by that time, you're like, I don't remember.
You remember,
It's like, do you know what this is about? And you're like thinking back on like the morning or something, and then you're like, oh, wait a minute, it is like a week ago. Oh, that's great. Oh, my God, that's too funny. Now, doing that kind of stuff, I suppose you got to meet a lot of interesting people and stuff
continually.
With radio, all the time, doing interviews and things like that.
And, back in that day, radio people weren't out that much until people really started to do live remotes.
Oh, yeah, it was all like in studio, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And once the live remotes came along, then you really started to meet a lot of people, some of which you couldn't get away from. One of the most interesting fellas, though, was when I worked my first job out of college was at KFKA in Greeley, Colorado. And Windsor was about 7 miles to the west. And there was also a lake around Windsor. Well, every morning at 5:20, after I just finished reading the weather and giving the temperature, this one guy would call up, hey, it's 7 degrees cooler coming off the lake over here at Windsor. It was always 7. And this was every single day, Monday through Friday. 7 degrees cooler coming off the lake today. Oh, okay, hey, thanks, and so forth. Well, eventually, he starts having a conversation and gabbing. And it gets to the point, hey, I met this gal the other night, and, I think it's serious, and so I proposed. So I'm sitting there thinking, okay, in one night, you went from think it's serious to proposing. And she said yes. And she said, well, who are we going to get to stand up for us? He says, well, I know this guy that's on the radio over in Greeley. It's the last time I ever spoke to him. I'd see the phone ring the next time in the morning. I didn't answer it. And that was before there was such a thing as caller ID.
Oh, that's funny. That's so funny. What's one of the? We'll get wrapped up here, but I want to ask, what was one of your favorite experiences? You know, as far as radio, like somebody you met. Like I know you probably have a lot, and it's going to be hard to pick just one. But is there somebody that you got to meet and you know, maybe do an interview or one that really? I'll
give you three things. First of all, I got to meet John Elway, Hall of Fame quarterback, because the first thing I ever did was I was a reporter at Denver Broncos training camp for that station.
Wow. Excellent.
I'll come back to the second thing that happened at the Broncos training camp in a bit, but my most favorite thing I ever got to do, Glenn Campbell came to town to play with the South Dakota Symphony Orchestra, and it was being recorded for PBS for a special. And they had a press junket that day beforehand. I got to interview him live on the air from the pavilion.
Oh, wow.
And it was remarkable. I wish I still had that on record somewhere because it was a really solid interview. And I will always remember one of the things he said. I said, what makes a great song? He says, no doubt about it, songwriter.
Oh, wow.
And he says, I've been fortunate to have the best in Jimmy Webb. And it was just, I've never forgotten that because, that man was talented. You know, he could play a guitar like nobody else. But he always wanted to give credit to whoever wrote the song.
Wow, that's amazing.
And so that's one that's in the heart for a long, long time. But then the best piece of advice I ever got was from a legendary sportscaster out of Denver named Tony LaMonica. He worked for one of the legendary stations, KHOW, out of Denver. So when I was at the Denver Bronco training camp, the station that I worked for was, quote-unquote, the host station because we were the local station. And so we had this little trailer, you know, for our remote studio. And I'm out front of it one day, and Tony's trailer was next to us, except it was a 65-foot RV with leather seats and air conditioning. And that was the first year that the NFL allowed other teams to come practice with another team in training camp. And so the Houston Oilers, back then Houston Oilers, were there, and for a couple of days, a few practices. The legendary Bum Phillips, you know, quite a character with the cowboy hat and everything. He was the coach at that time. It was Warren Moon's first year in the NFL after having played in the Canadian Football League, and then Nebraska's famous running back Mike Rozier had just signed on with the Oilers as well. So everybody's around those people, and it wasn't formal interviews. It was press conference type, but out on a football field.
Yep.
Well, that morning, I had gotten both Mike Rozier and Warren Moon on tape. So I'm waiting for the afternoon session, and Tony LaMonica comes strolling by. He's one of these big voice guys, Tony LaMonica, K-House Sports. And so he asked me, he says, did you get any tape this morning? I said, yeah. I said, I got Mike Rozier and Warren Moon. And he says that he couldn't make it to the morning session because, well, he had to interview Terry Bradshaw. I was like, well, that's pretty cool. He says, I got him on tape. You want to swap tape? Come over to my, trailer, quote unquote, the palace, and sit in there. And not only was it leather seats and air conditioning, Tony at that time was probably already in his mid-60s. And the female accompanying him was not much older than me. So this is a pretty cool deal. Well, he can tell that it's, first job, and so forth, cub reporter, whatever you want to say. And he says, do me two favors. Okay. He says, never be afraid to ask a stupid question, because it may get you the best piece of audio you've ever wanted. The other thing is, be yourself. Don't try to emulate anyone. And so that's what I've always gone with. I'm not a hard-hitting interviewer. I want to have a conversation. And then years ago, one of the people that I worked with on the air, my morning partner was Susan Malone, and her then husband was the general manager of Kello TV. We're out having drinks one night, and he says, you and Greg Belfrage, who's the big rah, 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 big talk show, political and everything, which I just don't do. He says, you and Greg actually are very similar. And I'm like, what? He says, you both get out of your guests what you want. It's just that at the end of the interview, people want to punch Greg and they want to hug you.
That's a pretty good observation, too. That's a pretty good feel-good way to have somebody say that about radio.
Yeah.
I'm pulling this up because I like to end. I've been doing this thing at the end of my podcast called Pick a Number, and since we're recording remotely, I have to pull it up on my phone because I don't have my stuff with me. But what it is you're going to pick a number between 1 and 20.
Okay.
And then I'm going to ask you a corresponding question. That's just kind of a fun question. So I just got to find it real quick, and then we will do this. I'm stalling here because I got to pull it up like an unprofessional because I should have had it ready. Here we go. All right. Pick a number between 1 and 20.
7.
7. Lucky number 7. All right. What song would you have played at your funeral and why?
Only one?
Well, or a couple. Or a couple songs.
Well, I want to be taken out at the end of the service with Jackson Brown's Running on Empty. But at the beginning, I think Seasons of Love from the musical Rent. And I've loved that song ever since the first time I saw Rent. It's just such a great tale, and I want to have a video compilation for it and so forth. But the first thing is, I'm going to be going up in flames anyway. Cremation for me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I want a video to start off the service. And it's going to say, welcome to Dave's funeral. And then the L is going to drop off, the A, the R, and the E. Welcome to Dave's fun.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful way to end this.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, and if you want to plug anything, your social media and stuff,
certainly.
This is the time to do that.
DaveHolleyHour.com is the website. You will find it on Facebook under The Dave Holley Hour. And also make sure that you take a look at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Podbean is the place that I actually host it on. And from there it goes to several others, so you may find it somewhere else as well. It comes out with a new episode every Thursday morning, and it's all about Sioux Empire Arts and Entertainment. And for those who don't know the Sioux Empire, it's the greater Sioux Falls metro area. Right in the middle of America where Interstates 90 and 29 converge.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dave.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, Dan.
The Art of Bombing is a Blitz Entertainment production. Hosted and produced by Dan Bublitz Jr., The Art of Bombing intro music was written and performed by John Holt. All other music used in this podcast was under the Creative Commons license. If you would like to help The Art of Bombing, you can do so by subscribing, rating, and reviewing our show on whatever podcast application you use to listen to The Art of Bombing. For previous episodes, blogs, and more, visit artofbombingpod.com. Have a great week, and remember, stay safe so you can live to love.